Thanks for being here. I run an organization called Madison. We market professional services firms. Prior to that, I was a founding partner at a firm called Manifold for 12 years. We were a product development firm that eventually moved upstream to enterprise consulting, like innovation consulting. And then we had a early stage venture arm and did 25 or so investments. We were around 70 or so folks when I stepped away. I think we did around $20 million in revenue that last year I was there. For 9 years, I taught digital marketing at Kellogg. And in 2022, stepped away from both, took 18 months off, figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. Here I am. The playbook I use is really informed, candidly, in the beginning, it was an N of one, informed by a lot of the mistakes I made at Manifold. While I'm proud of what we built, there are a lot of things that I could have done better and that we could have done better. And so I am trying to help other firms avoid some of those mistakes and build Madison itself differently based on that. So a lot of this is going to be pattern recognition. Since I've started Madison, I've had the benefit of talking to a lot of firms that have evolved my thinking in some areas, my thinking in others. I have a lot more conviction about what I'm going to show you here, even than when I started. This is the first time I'm presenting this. Give me a little bit of grace as we go through it. If I stumble, you can get up and walk away in the middle of it. I did stand up in college. I've endured worse, so I can handle it. If you want to heckle me, you can do that too. But yeah, so the basic premise, I don't believe that people buy professional services the way that they buy other products or services. And what happens a lot of times is we try to take lessons, especially lately from startup land, from B2B SaaS companies and things like that. And we try to apply that playbook to professional services. And I just don't think it works. I don't think it's how consultants themselves are naturally wired. And I don't think it is how people who are buying from consultants want to buy. And when I say the playbook, I think really like this idea of a funnel of kind of aggressively going out there and targeting cold leads. You've probably been hit up on LinkedIn or otherwise in the past with people saying, hey, do you want 10 to 15 leads automatically through your whatever? We hired firms like that at Manifold. It never worked. I think it did more damage than good. Manifold was my previous firm. It was an innovation consulting firm. Yeah. So yeah, the playbook, let's go out and generate a bunch of cold leads. Let's turn those into proposals. Let's like work the pipeline. I just don't think works particularly well. You've probably already tried it. In order for them to buy from you, they have to trust you. You have to become a trusted advisor. The way that most of the time people do that is they do it through referral. So they are borrowing the credibility of a friend or a colleague who refers you. And so there's trust baked into that. When you talk to most boutique firms, you ask them what's their most effective marketing strategy, they're most likely to say referral. There's nothing wrong with referral. I think referral is great. And I think that there's things that you can do to actually make that more likely to happen, which we'll talk about as we go through this. It's just insufficient. There are other things that we can be doing to show up for our prospective customers and get more of them to raise their hands. And that's what we're going to walk through today. This is how I think about it. And this has gone through several iterations. Where I'm at today, the three main problems I see are lack of awareness of my firm and what we do, poor pipeline, and we don't crush it on delivery. And so that kind of creates a perpetuating cycle. And so everything that we're going to go through each of these 9 pillars that you can see on the ring on the outside here, but they all really boil down to this idea of get super, super clear on what you do, who you do it for, and why you're unique. Communicate that on a consistent basis through what I call authority marketing. All of it is about adding value, being as helpful as I can, and building trust over time. Creating respectful ways for them to raise their hands when they're ready. So not pushy, not spammy, not cringy, not hyper aggressive. Like most consultants, even they bristle at the term sales. They think of themselves as domain experts. Everything we're going to talk about, I want to be the kind of thing that you're going to be proud of doing and that you're not going to feel like you're harassing people. And then once you do get clients, just crush it on delivery so that they feel compelled to tell other people. That's basically the model. So we're going to dig into the specific. Interrupt me, raise your hand. I'll be happy to stop and answer questions as we go along. I mentioned it in Slack. Best question gets this bottle of champagne. Step 1, identify your point of view. Most professional service firms within their domain sell a commodity and they don't want to admit it. If you sell tax accounting, or you are an attorney, or you're a software firm, or a design shop, or whatever it is, for the most part, the services that you're selling, if you're truly honest with yourself, you would never say that, to the market, but really it's relatively fungible and it's only becoming more. So the way that I think you stand out is through having a strong and compelling point of view. I think that has 4 elements: who you serve, a specific client that you try to serve better than anybody else, why you exist, your values, what you represent to the world through your organization, what you believe, the unique ideas you have about how to go about doing what you do. There might be 500 tax accountants in the world, but you have a unique lens on that landscape that informs how you do the work, and more importantly, the kind of work you don't do, how you speak, the style you use, the tone of voice, how you choose to show up in the world. I think you add all of those things up, and that kind of creates your point of view. This is very similar to how people think about brand. A lot of people talk about branding is not your logo. Branding is the sum of all interactions that you have with an organization or company. All of these things matter. If you serve everybody, you probably have a weak brand. One of the things people talk about with branding is getting specific and saying, this is who we are and this is who we're not. What you believe to be true informs that. Your values certainly inform that. Your company, in a way, is pointing to something. Like you are, and I think all of you are owners here, you're building something with your company. I think of it as a testament to who you can be at your best. And we're all flawed people and we're all messed up in all our ways. But my company has an opportunity to point to something. It's a theme of what I am trying to create. If you can get clear on that theme and what you're trying to point to, you can design marketing messages, you can design account management practices, you can design systems that live up to that vision of what you believe a company could be at its best. I think people see that, and that creates strong differentiation. And then lastly, the way that you speak, especially if you communicate in a way that's maybe slightly different or oblique from how your competitors talk. If they're all using the exact same words and the exact same language, it's difficult to differentiate. How can you use different language to reframe a conversation? One of the key things that comes into that is drilling into what you believe. When I was digital marketing at Kellogg, I talked a lot about this idea of a meta narrative. And if you were selling CRM software and all you talk about with your marketing is CRM software and why my CRM software is so great, that really limits what you can do. And it's not super compelling, and people eventually tune out and don't listen to you. And so it really limits what you could do. And so what I would advocate that they would do is try to identify what we called a meta narrative. It was something larger that my customer is trying to accomplish. I play a piece of that, but it is bigger. And to use the CRM example, I'm trying to build an elite sales organization. CRM is part of that, and making sure that my team is using it well is certainly part of that. But there's a whole bunch of other pieces. When I do that, two things happen. One, I can talk about a lot more than I could before. You start to trust me as an expert in the domain of how you build an elite sales organization. If you believe me about that, you are primed, believe me, when it's time to talk about the actual thing that I sell or the service that I provide. And so I think the exact same thing is true for professional services firms. An exercise that I like to do with my clients is when we first kick things off is, imagine that you were going to come in tomorrow and do a lunch and learn or write a book about your topic. What would the table of contents be for that book? Or what would you be able to talk about extemporaneously that signals expertise on the one hand, and also signals that you have a unique lens in which how you see the world? That is my unified theory. This is an example from Manifold. So when we moved upstream, we were working with startups, and we had this early stage venture fund. Enterprise clients started coming to us because they were standing up innovation teams. And when they already drank our Kool-Aid, usually because I taught at Kellogg, my partner Joe taught at Kellogg as well, we would go to speak at Techstars, we would do those kinds of things. Like when people were already bought into or had drank our Kool-Aid, our close rate was very high. When they didn't, our close rate was very low. And we were banging our heads against the wall trying to figure out why. We realized that we didn't have a clear point of view about why you should work with us or what is the right way to do innovation inside an enterprise environment. And we did a lot of work, and where we coalesced was taking our kind of startup background and our venture background and apply that to corporate innovation. And so we had things like, you should have a clear thesis. So like venture funds tend to have thesis driven. Like we believe a certain thing to be true, like the future of work is AI enabled. Or we have a point of view about the future of blockchain, connected health, and wearable devices. You have a thesis, right? And so we were like, have a thesis, take a portfolio approach. Venture is smart enough to realize that they're going to make 20 investments, 80% of them are going to go to zero, and they don't know which ones. So we got to spread risk across a bunch of bets and don't put all of our eggs in one basket. Same thing is true in corporate innovation. It's like we wrote down 10 or 12 of these ideas, and that encapsulated our unified theory. And what that allowed us to do, we were going up against the late digitals of the world. A lot of these much larger companies are standing up these innovation arms, and they couldn't say what we could say because they didn't run a venture fund and they had never worked inside of startups. They were consultants who had always done consulting, and they saw an opportunity to move from strategy consulting to innovation consulting. And so we were the only people that could say that. And a good test I like to use for this is if you take your unified theory and you swap out your company's name for one of your competitors' names, if it's still true for them, then you have work to do. If it's the kind of thing where you swap it out and you're like, I don't think anybody else can say this the way that we say it, then I think you're on the right track. That's the idea around unified theory. And I think the other point on this is that it doesn't even necessarily have to be true for all people at all times. I don't think you have to go out there and say, this is the only way to do this. I think what you can go out there, which is a much more humble view, which is, this is what's worked for me. And that they can't argue with, right? And that gives you credibility and allows you to speak forcefully about your ideas while holding space for alternative views. So I think that becomes more compelling. You avoid having to get into arguments with people who disagree with your premise, because it's like, you're disagreeing with, this actually worked for us. So that's unified theory. And then the other document I like to create is called a manifesto. A manifesto summarizes the emotional piece of it. It takes all of the stuff around values. It takes all the stuff around like who we're trying to serve and what we believe to be true. It's the first opportunity to represent that in our tone of voice in a way that is compelling and strong. And at a minimum, it's a useful tool for internal purposes, for internal teams, is a rallying cry. But often I think it can also be really useful content, like on your About Us page, or when people come into your site and they say, okay, yeah, we do software development, but here's our why. This is why we exist and the dent that we're trying to make in the universe. This is an example for a firm that does growth marketing for startups. And lots of people do paid ads, lots of people do organic search. They are obsessed with, they talked about these ideas around, we want to be in the trenches. We deliberately only work with a couple of companies at a time. We prefer to go deep rather than wide. We are craft as much as advisors. We have a utilitarian aesthetic. Our emails are to the point. Our deliverables are easy to understand. We always end meetings with next steps and accountability. These are things they can communicate that say, hey, this is what we value in the world. And this is how we try to live that out inside of our organization. Could you try to take all that stuff and try to condense it into something like that? If you're interested, I can share other examples with you after the meeting as well. I just think patterns and seeing how other people do it. This is an optional step, but I think it's a valuable one. Technically an optional step. You can't always do this for every kind of company, but I think when you can, it's really valuable. The way I define a framework is a proprietary methodology informed by your point of view, organized and represented visually, designed to solve an industry-specific problem in a differentiated way. I have a framework for creating frameworks, a little inception-y. I did a workshop on this a couple months ago that goes into a ton more detail. I'll share that with you as well if you're interested. The gist of it is we identify the elements that belong in a framework. We try to choose clear and memorable labels that differentiate it. We figure out what the interactions are between those elements, like what precedes what's influenced by what. We organize those into pillars and then represent it visually. Then we test it in the market and see what works. An example of this, we went into enterprise. We had a unique relationship with a firm called Valens Research that had access to a proprietary data set of all public companies. They took their accounting data and they normalized it to create an apples to apples comparison between different companies. Debatable how like real that is. A manufacturing firm is probably pretty different than a hospital, but that was the intent. We took the investments made in R&D on one axis and then how that was translating into value creation on the other axis. And we created 4 quadrants and called it the Growth Innovators Framework. The 2x2. One of the team members, Kirk Goldsberry, who's a sports writer, had this thing where point arc with a shot chart of somebody's, shooting over the course of a basketball season. And it had this like honeycomb thing. And so we were like, that'd be cool if we do the 2x2 and then we do these honeycomb things. And so that visualization in the middle is a 2x2 chart. We could create it across all the companies. We could create it for an industry. We could create it for your company year over year and see how you're moving across the axes over time. And it was really helpful because what it allowed us to do was like, we had some interesting top of the funnel awareness building content around what is a growth innovator. We could do vignettes on specific companies that were in the top right quadrant within any particular industry. It also gave us something interesting to say in a business development context, because I could now reach out to, hey, so we have this Growth Innovators Framework. we did a deep dive into the 60 companies that we identified in the insurtech space and plotted them on here. Would love to show you where you rank relative to your peers. It was piquing curiosity. It was hyper relevant to them. So that got us in the door. And then bottom of the funnel, you have that kind of assessment effectively, depending on where they end up in that quadrant. We had different engagement types. Regardless of where you were, we could do something with that. The ideal framework is similar in that it informs your point of view. People get a lot of confidence from frameworks. They're like, oh, these are the elements. It's like McKinsey's like a 7S framework or Porter's 5 forces model, or like all of these things that you teach in business schools. People are like, oh, these are the elements. And it's like, maybe the elements, maybe they're not elements. It could be relatively arbitrary. But like the point is that you've done the work of codifying it visually. And that, again, signals trust to create preference. It makes me more likely to want to buy from you because it ties up to your point of view. And I think where your point of view lives is in between problem and solution. A lot of times we jump from you have a problem, here's my solution. I think what all of this does from a point of view standpoint is it sits in the middle and says, this is why you have that problem. This is what's going on either in the macro environment or in your world that explains why this problem is happening to you. I've seen this movie before. It signals trust to you. Not only have I seen it, I've codified it in a framework that you can easily understand. If I understand your problem, and if you agree with me about my point of view, explaining why your problem exists, I am naturally predisposed to believe your solution will be the right solution for me. So all of this is in support of creating trust. Not everybody can do a framework. If you can, it's a huge bonus. We want to go out in the market through what I call authority marketing. I believe people want to buy professional services from people, not firms. Deloitte might be the company, but they're buying from Bob, Paul, or Lindsay. The majority of your marketing needs to come from your people. Every revenue generating professional in your firm should have a communication cadence in their area of expertise that has both the point of view of the company and injects a bit of their own personality, consistently published, and adapted to the best practices of that platform. That's authority marketing in a nutshell. The platform that, at least right now, is most effective for doing that is LinkedIn for most people. It's because that's where your buyers hang out. And I think I say this here. A lot of people, when they start doing content marketing, start with their website. We should write blog posts, we should write white papers, etc. The problem with that is it assumes people are coming to your website, and they're not. The only people that are coming to your website are people who already know who you are. And so your options to get people to come to your website are run paid ads, which are expensive for most professional services firms, and their conversion rates usually don't justify it. Organic search, which this is what, and we tried this with Manifold, we were beating our head against the wall because we were going up against the McKinseys and the Deloittes of the world for almost any relevant topic related to innovation consulting. They have crazy domain authority. Basically, the way Google works is what other people say about you is more important than what you say about yourself. They scrape your site, get a sense of what your site is about, extract that into keywords, but then the most important thing are inbound links. So how many inbound links are coming to your site, and what is the authority of those sites that are linking to you? A link from Harvard Business Review matters way more than 100 links from like Bob's Jacuzzi Emporium, right? So the McKinseys and the Deloittes of the world have an inherent advantage over a boutique firm there. And is it impossible? No, but it's really hard and time consuming, and it takes a long time. We were banging our head against that wall for a while. It wasn't working. The only phrases we could rank for were very informational searches, like what is innovation, which we got a top 3 position on. The head of innovation at Exelon knows what innovation is, and that's not what they're searching for. We were not able to crack the organic search nut, the paid ads nut. We just lit a bunch of money on fire. So we're like, what can we do? And I was like, we've had 8 managing directors, each of whom has an area of expertise like customer experience, healthcare, or financial services. You all have some audience size on LinkedIn. It might be modest. It might be 300 people, it might be 500 people, whatever it is. But if they're the right 500 people, we can build a great business off that. Candidly, we needed 5 new accounts a year. We don't have to be casting this huge net. And so that's where we decided to play. What we found was it makes content creation much easier because you don't have to create a 10,000 word white paper. It allows you to be a little bit more candid and off the cuff. In the beginning, it's hard. It's like riding a bike. But when you get practice with it and you build the muscle, like for me at the point, I publish 4 or 5 times a week now. It's at the point now where I'm standing in line and waiting for my coffee and I just bang something out because I understand the format. I have a backlog of ideas. My antenna is up. I've realized that every single client call, every single interaction with an internal team member is content. There is a lesson that I can extract out of that that is applicable to other people once my attention is up. And so it lowers the bar for them. They don't have to write how they learned in MBA school. In fact, it's an impediment. It makes them sound sterile and makes them sound not interesting. And it was effective. It was like, I can either spend 6 months banging my head against the wall and be on page 8 of the Google search results for any phrases that are relevant to me, or I can have John Sfiocla post 3 times a week about stuff related to his domain, where we maybe get 500 impressions on it on LinkedIn. For a lot of those might only be them scrolling through their feed or whatever and see. But what I learned was, even if they don't click on read more, they still see my face with my headline and they reinforce, oh yeah, he's the guy that does X or whatever. That's why we leaned in on LinkedIn. I don't know if that will always be true, but that is where attention is right now. So that's where I would lean in. People engage with people, not companies. This is a client of mine. They're in the construction space. The founder, on average, outperforms the company from an engagement standpoint by 5x every single time. I think people like to engage with faces and not logos. They like to hear personal stories and anecdotes. It communicates trust. It's easier to do. And so why not do it? I still think there is a place for the company to put out messages. I think it can be useful as a recruiting tool. I think it's a useful way to do the humble braggy thing of, hey, congrats, we're hitting 500 or whatever it is. And then maybe you can repost it and tell a story about what it was like 5 years ago when you first started the firm and how it felt to have your logo on the door for the first time. And you can connect emotionally with that story. There's a way that you can do it, but in general, I think people prefer to engage with people, not companies.
Personal, they've always seen Facebook's where you put family photos and LinkedIn, but like you said, I mean, 90% of our customer base doesn't touch Facebook.
Right.
And it's interesting, like in the entertainment lighting industry, everybody's on Facebook. How personal do you get?
I think that is an individual decision, and I think it's up to everybody to make that choice. So things I have seen, and this is from an awareness perspective, I didn't have a lot of conviction on this when I started. I do now. I don't pay attention to metrics, and I'll explain why in a second. But what I have found is, if metrics did matter to you, personal anecdotes that aren't like, actually, that's not even true. People like to buy from people, and part of that is interjecting your personality into it. In general, I would say I take like a 90-10 kind of thing on this. Like 90% of the time, I'm just trying to add as much value as I possibly can. 10% of the time, I try to inject a little bit of personality. So an example is, one of the lessons for me I took out of my reflections on Manifold was that we were really bad at celebrating. And I had 2 other partners, and I was like, we hit $1 million in revenue. We're going to throw a rager for the first time. We hit that number. It took us 3 years to do it. We didn't even think about it until the end of the year. I realized that I needed it and that my team needed it. This time around, one of my goals is celebrating. Part of the brand is I want to share that with people. I have a recurring content pillar, let's say. It's only 5% maybe of the content I put out there, but it's in the vein of celebrating. One of the ways we made that concrete is we have a bottle of champagne whenever we get a new client, no matter how big they are or how small they are. And so that is a theme now, where as you project that out over years, there's a lot of things I can theoretically do with that. I have a fridge in my office, a little mini fridge. It's underneath the desk. It has a little sticker on it that says champagne is for closers. You do not go in the fridge unless you get a client. I like to think of 10-year time horizons. So I'm in year 1 of this, but I'm picturing my company 10 years from now. And we have the champagne fridge. Everybody knows what the champagne fridge is. I picture a world where there's 5 bottles of champagne that get consumed because we have that many people and we're all celebrating together. That is a story that I can tell that is a little bit personal, but still about the company. It speaks about the values of the business. Like I kicked off, for example, with a client 6 weeks ago, and we had the meeting. It was here in the office, and they brought me a bottle of champagne because they know that story. Gary Vaynerchuk's a famous example. He started a very big social media agency. People who know him know that he goes to garage sales on the weekend because he just likes to haggle, and he wants to own the New York Jets someday. So he injects that bit of his personality into some of the stuff he does. Most of it is about value creation. So that's where I've landed on it. I don't get super vulnerable. And in fact, I'm a little bit cynical about authenticity marketing because people know that it works. If something bad were to happen to my parents, for example, I'm not going to publish that on LinkedIn. That's a decision I've made. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. You will get a lot of engagement. You will get a lot of people offering you condolences. It will be one of the more effective posts that you do in terms of reach. I'm just not willing to do it. One of my limits is everything that I post for myself, I want the CEO of Deloitte or McKinsey or whatever to look at it and be like, I could see myself publishing something like that. That's one of the things I talk about with my clients. I was like, where do you want to sit on that continuum? And there are people who I think maybe that's just because it's not how I'm naturally wired. I think of it as being fake authentic. I bet there are people for whom that is legit authentic though, and that's okay. So that's how they should show up.
So one thing, I am very hesitant about LinkedIn because my jam is Instagram, where I can be very authentic, very real. And I had someone say that I need to be on LinkedIn because there is a sea of folks who are just putting, oh, look at me, I got this award,
Yep.
and just like nothing of real value.
Yep.
So I think that there is space there
Yep.
to insert, even if it's 10%, to insert
Yep.
that realness.
And personally, whenever I see those award posts, I always wonder how much did that award cost?
And that's what most people, so like when most people, they start doing LinkedIn, they think what that means is I either just repost what my company published with no context, which doesn't work at all, or it's the humble brag, like humbled and honored to whatever. I guess my version of authentic is I tell stories about previous things and lessons I've learned and things like that. I don't veer too much into the personal, but that's just more of my comfort level. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It just is where you're comfortable with. But 80% is just try to focus on super value add. What I call that here is give away my secrets. So a lot of times professional service firms, you're effectively monetizing your brain. You're monetizing your ideas. People tend to clutch their ideas and hold them very closely. They are like, I'm not going to share my best stuff with you. You have to pay to get my best stuff. My point of view on that is if you're sharing lukewarm stuff, people aren't going to believe that you have better stuff. And so they're not going to give you the chance to show them your great stuff. And then two, what I have found is I can tell you all the things to do. I almost lean into, I want to bombard people. I want to tell them everything I know about a thing because they'll be like, wow, those guys know so much about this space. And then they're like, I don't know how I'm going to implement this because I'm busy. I have all these things going on. That's a great outcome. So I will give you everything. It worked really well for us. This is an example from mine. I had a 193 slide deck from Kellogg on how to achieve product market fit for an early stage startup. I just gave it away. And I had to spend 3 weeks sitting in LinkedIn because it was just say product market fit or whatever. I just spent 3 weeks giving people my deck, which was very inefficient and painful, but it was great. That was particularly effective for us. It was one of the more effective kind of marketing posts that I'd ever did. I usually don't try to go viral. That was the closest I ever got. Every post, I try to teach something concrete and applicable. So the kinds of things that you can put in a blog post, shorter, more actionable, punchier, less formal. There's this idea of mere exposure effect. So this gets to the point around consistency. What I can tell you, and I know, and it also speaks to the thing I was saying earlier about how I don't pay attention to metrics. So what I have seen is the posts that get the most reach are not always the posts that lead to business. They might be the post that gets you some affinity with me, like you might like me more because of something that I wrote, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to want to raise your hand. And in fact, the stuff that makes you trust that I am is actually pretty niche stuff. So it's the kind of stuff that if I'm in your ideal client profile, I tried this already, it didn't work. And you write a post about why it didn't work. I'm like, yes, this person sees me, this person understands me. By definition, those posts are not going to be the posts that get a tremendous amount of reach. And these are some examples of these. There is zero correlation between people liking my content or commenting on my content or reposting my content and when they raise their hand. In fact, most of them connected with me at some point, followed, they thought something was interesting or whatever. And then at some point they raise their hand. It's usually a DM on LinkedIn. I don't even know if they even touch the website. Maybe they do, but they just tell me, hey, really enjoying the content. They can't point to which one it was. It builds over time. And sometimes they read that first sentence, it doesn't resonate, so they keep scrolling, like no big deal. But if I do it enough times, I make little trust deposits each day. Eventually, they're going to raise their hand when they're ready. So I don't believe in trying to manufacture buying windows. I don't do the cold outbound playbook. I believe in just showing up and being as helpful as I can. And then when a buying window naturally emerges, no problem, Kelsey. I'll send you the rest as well. Thanks for coming. A lot of people try to get cute. This is very tactical, but like with your like LinkedIn like headline, clarity matters a ton. So a lot of people try to be cute about it. They're like change maker, visionary, and I don't know what you do. And so you're a small subset of people are going to click through to actually see your profile and carefully read your resume. You want your headline to say clearly what you do. So I think I say Kellogg professor just because of credibility. And then I say I help professional service from scratch, exactly what I do and for whom. So.
Choice to put, talk to me if you're thinking about putting that.
It just was a feature that they added. And I said, sure. I don't have a problem with it. I don't know. I've never thought about that. I don't have a huge opinion from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, I just wonder if something like that might inadvertently, unfortunately, hate
One way or the other. Sure. There might be a group of people that don't resonate with that. Who are you trying to? I don't want to go off on too much of a rabbit trail. Philosophically, I'll work with anybody. I just like doing good work and helping people. I've learned I like most people. I think we've created an environment where we jump really quickly to thorny questions. And I think we tend to paint people in poor lights based on their answers. I think I live in a bubble, and a lot of my opinions are a function of how I grew up, who I spend time around, how the algorithms try to shape my opinions. And I don't think I'm wise. And I don't think I'm smarter than anybody. And I think they have their own bubble, and it's largely outside of their control. And a lot of it we're not even aware of. And so I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Just want to do good work. Yeah, I just want to help people. In my little lane, we could have different politics and I could still help you grow your company. That's a win for me. It's fun work. I enjoy doing it. But candidly, I didn't think much about it. I think I logged into LinkedIn one day and they were like, hey, here's this new thing. Do you want to add this? I'm like, sure. And then I got back to my day. I didn't consider it too much. So yeah, keep showing up, be consistent with it. It doesn't even have to be that good, especially in the beginning. I think a lot of people get worried about how good of a writer they are. I think it's a muscle, like anything. I think you practice it. I do not believe that somebody will read a post that you write, disagree with it, maybe unless you lean into some thornier and cultural topics, but if you're just writing about your work, no one's going to read a post, disagree with something, 7 years later, be like, I'm not working with you because I remember 7 years ago, like we think that people are thinking about us way more than they are. They're just not. They're looking at it. It's one of the 12 browser tabs they have open. They logged into LinkedIn for 3 minutes at the beginning of their day. They're looking at it again in line in the coffee shop or whatever. And then they get back to doing what they're doing. They're barely paying attention to you at all. They're thinking about themselves and their own lives or whatever it is. And that's the other reason why I don't pay attention to metrics, is because I feel like there's a risk of audience capture. If I look at my analytics and I'm like, oh, that post did really well, that means I need to write a lot more about that post. It did really well in the form of likes and comments. It didn't necessarily do well in the form of getting people to raise their hands. As long as I'm in alignment with my values and it's in alignment with my content pillars, I'm fine.
What percentage of your posts, if any, has a call to action?
I get if I have one, it's very soft. At the end, I don't do the thing. Some people will do like a byline at the end. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I think there is a universe of people on LinkedIn who candidly are probably better at it than me in terms of reach. And they have a playbook. So their playbook looks like spicy hook. So like I proposed to my fiance last week, here are 5 lessons about B2B sales. It worked really well. I will never write a piece of content. They have a byline at the end with the recycle, like they try to ask you to like and repost everything over and over again. It is a influencery playbook, which there is nothing wrong with. And if that's what you're trying to do, it will work. Again, my bar is I want the chief revenue officer at an investment bank to look at my thing and be like, oh, I want to, because that's the kind of stuff that we're creating on their behalf. Every piece of content I'm creating, I'm signaling to you what it's going to be like to work with me and the kinds of stuff you can expect me to create for you. And for me, I want them to think, you look pretty technical, very focused on value creation and trying to be as helpful as I possibly can. That's what I want them to walk away with. But there's not a right or wrong answer. And I've seen that I've written 45 proposals this year since January. It took me 6 years to do that with Manifold. I'm so much more clear on what I'm doing and for whom. Before, we were just people that do stuff. And it was like, we were selling skills. And I'm like, well, what do you want us to do for you? Because we can do anything. That's not a really good way to sell. Now, I'm much more clear on what I do. Every single piece of content is in service of that. It's not because I'm a particularly gifted writer. It's just being consistent and clear about what you're doing. If you're in a large organization, pick lanes. It's hard to speak to all the different audiences, especially in a larger organization all the time. And the same thing with the corporate LinkedIn page. But your individual profiles can be all about, I'm going to be the change management person. I'm going to be the whatever revenue optimization person. So the idea is just like each leader has their own content pillars. So it's a conversion tool. Solution designs. A lot of firms sell skills. We do Webflow. We are graphic designers. We do accounting. When I think what your client wants are solutions. They don't want a React native app. They want a successful app in the App Store. They want a more profitable business. And a piece of that is by optimizing operations. And a key part of that is by giving clarity on what's actually going on in my business, right? So as much as possible, I want to move away from skills and move away from just a group of people that do stuff and toward solutions that make it easy for you to understand how you can buy from me. And so I call it like your menu of engagements. An exercise that I like to do with firms is create a one-pager. Can I communicate what the benefit is for you if you use it? What's the problem that it solves? Sprinkle in my point of view a little bit that explains why. Can talk about what the deliverables are and what it looks like, but the main point is, what do you get out of it? An example here is for Manifold, you can validate a product idea in 6 weeks before you commit significant resources to it. Really what we were selling was landing pages, some paid ads, some cold outreach. Those were the tools or the skills that we were selling. The solution we were selling was in 6 weeks, you're going to know whether or not this idea is worth committing actual resources to so that you don't waste 3 years of your life and a bunch of money. That was what we were selling. Try to do it, see if you can fit it on a page. And then you go out and you circulate it. And this is really helpful for R&D too, like as you're testing new service offerings, because it's really easy to change a one-pager. Like you don't have to do the work of redoing your whole website. You can make a one-pager. And in fact, this is how I did Madison. Madison was my third idea. For the first two were crappy. I created a 3 or 5 slide deck. It wasn't a one-pager. And then I immediately went on LinkedIn and I looked at my network for people in the ideal client for that. I said, hey, I'm not selling anything. I just want to see, I'm thinking about starting a new business that does X before I waste the next 10 years of my life on something stupid. I want you to convince me that this is a bad idea and why, and convince me out of it. And the first two, they did that. They were lukewarm. They weren't super enthusiastic about it. The third one, they were like, I get it. This is a problem I have. I want to create content. I don't have time. I don't know how to do it. I've tried all the things you're talking about. How much does it cost? What would it look like? And so then you take off your customer hat and you put on your sales hat, and that's how you know that you've got something. And so it's really useful when I'm researching potential new service offerings or when I'm researching positioning, because I can hold it really loosely. It's an artifact that's easy to fix and change and iterate it. I have a larger client context. So basically, I try to understand the journey of my client and where I fit within it. So in the beginning, we were a product shop. We realized really quickly, though, that if they didn't do get a run, okay. I'll share it with you after. Send me, actually DM me, or you can email me. It says Sean@hiremadison.com, and I can share the stuff that I mentioned along with the recording that I have. We layered on marketing because we realized really quickly that our startup clients, if I built an app for them, but they didn't know how to go to market, it was like they were DOA. So we had to layer on digital marketing for them. That's why we did it. Over a period of years, we learned where we fit, and that informed the menu of engagements that we created. Over time, we started ticking off more of these pieces so that we had a menu of offerings that fit along the client journey that increased the surface area of what we could do for them. The best way I have found to get people to respectfully raise their hand is through workshops. You try to create workshops that address key pain points, and then you give them a ton of value. You want to make sure that they learn something, right? And so that's the most effective I've seen. You can do it as a webinar. You can do it in person. I'm a big fan of recording them because now you have an artifact that you can give to people later on that is helpful for you long-term. A lot of professional service firms, you have a long buying window, right? You have a 12 to 18 month sales cycle. It's not like you're buying shoes, right? And so nurturing those relationships is really hard, which begs the question, what in the world do I say? Like touch point 8, 7 months in, I gave my capabilities presentation to you. You're like, hey, this is great. Would love to work with you at some point, but it's a vague next step. They're not ready to move on. What in the world do you say? One of the things I have found is creating what I call natural and respectful ways to keep in touch. A lot of them aren't even about business. For example, I have a document that I created for Manifold and I sent for one for Madison called Ways to Love People. If somebody gets a new job, I have a book I can send them. If somebody has a kid, I have a book I can send them. If somebody needs a referral for a physical therapist, or a regular therapist or an accountant or an attorney or whatever it is. I have something I can send them. People at the station of life I'm in, parents are aging, people are starting to deal with that kind of stuff. As a family, we put together, like, how do we plan for our aging parents? And I realized that might be a useful artifact for people to keep those things. I use Notion because it's really easy to share. If I have a call with a client and they mention something like that, I can just send them a text after, hey, I know you mentioned that you're dealing with your mom or whatever it is. We went through that. Here's the plan we put in place just in case it's helpful. Or, hey, you mentioned that you're going to Paris. We took our kids there last year. Here's our itinerary. So it's just ways to consistently show up for them and surprise them in ways that aren't just, hey, are you ready to buy from me yet? It allows me to be top of mind. Between that and them seeing my content on LinkedIn and continuing to show up for them after that first meeting, I feel like for the most part, I'm able to accomplish the stay in touch piece in a way that's very respectful and not pushy at all. If you want to go to the next level with that, you can create a newsletter cadence. But again, I believe in doing that from the person, not the firm. So I do plain text. I don't make it a pretty HTML thing. So how do you knock your socks off with delivery? I think of onboarding as a performance. Your first 30 days can make or break you. The Ritz-Carlton is one of the companies I admire deeply. It's clear that they've thought through all of this stuff. I bake in deliverables. This client, Brian, I sent him a book from Hemingway as part of, hey, thanks so much for being a client. Hemingway is a writer I admire. I sent it to him. It just was like, hey, thanks so much for taking a chance on me and for signing up to be a client. And he reached out, he loved it. I also have to create deliberately not in scope that I send them anyway. This example, I have access to some databases. A lot of those cold outreach people have LinkedIn profiles as part of those databases. I believe that you can send a connection request to people. That's a respectful way to get them into I'm throwing a cocktail party with my LinkedIn. I'm not going to immediately try to get you on a sales call. All I'm doing is send you a connection request. All I want is to earn the right for you to see my content in your feed. But that was something that wasn't in scope of, hey, here are 1,000 early stage founders that are based in the markets that you're wanting to be in. I will share this stuff with you after. Thanks for joining. Oh my gosh, like this is so great. These can become a process that you can do over and over again every single time. And then the same way with account management. I think it's at least as important as the work. So what I try to do is I have every single meeting, every deliverable be magical. If it were magical, what would it be? I just want them to, at all times, to think that we are highly competent, that we're thinking about them all the time, and we are so buttoned up that it's a breath of fresh air. I'm used to dealing with vendors where everything is candidly a shit show and they're so put together, blah, blah, blah. And then just the last bit, what other people say about you most more than what you say about yourself. Referrals will always be a primary driver for new business, but we can be a little bit more organized around it. When a client tells me something that they're really happy about or really thrilled with the deliverable that we create, I use a platform called G2. If I'm going to be capturing the revenue, I might as well use a platform where I get some extra legs from it. So G2 is a marketplace of service providers. Clutch is another one. Capterra is another one. Doesn't matter which one you use. I just say, hey, really glad that things seem to be going well. If you have 2 minutes, would you mind leaving a review? No worries if not, if you're not comfortable, but it's super helpful for me. And almost always they say yes. You can be a little bit more systematic about asking for that stuff. The last piece, the authority marketing thing I've learned, I didn't know this when I started. It is actually really valuable for referrals too. So the majority of my audience on LinkedIn will never be a customer of mine. They either don't fit my ideal client profile or they just won't hire me. But they all know accountants, attorneys, people who are in my ideal client profile. And I cannot tell you how many of my clients come from somebody who would not be a client of mine, but knows somebody who would be a client of mine and introduced me, and it's on the back of the LinkedIn stuff. And then they have a bunch of stuff to share with them that says, hey, I've never worked with this guy, but they seem like they know what they're talking about. And here are some examples. And they're like, oh yeah, what you're talking about. Don't discount that. Just trust the process. You can get really clear on who you serve. If you show up consistently and helpfully, if you create respectful ways for them to raise their hands when they're ready, and if you think in a long enough time horizon, the answer to I have a pipeline problem and I need to fill my pipeline in the next 30 days, I think that's probably clear that this isn't that talk. But if you have a 10-year time horizon, it won't even take that long. Like I said, I've been in business for 8 months, and I'm much further ahead than I thought I would be when I started it. And I have a lot more conviction about this. And I'm seeing the same thing with my clients. They are like, this came in yesterday. I'm getting a lot of people reaching out for new work or referring me, mentioning how much they enjoyed reading the LinkedIn post and just wanted to pass that along. I believe it so much. It works. You just have to be patient. You have to shut down the part of your ego that says I'm not smart enough or nobody's going to care or people are going to yell at me. None of those things are going to happen. And if you're just consistent and you show up and try to add value and be helpful, people will raise their hands and then you get a chance to delight them. The end. I am available if you have other questions.
Are you seeing a common barriers to great implementation?
In client work, I think the three problems I run into over and over again are they're vague, or they try to be clever, being clear about who you serve and why. They're trying to serve everybody, afraid of taking business off the table by saying that I still get people all the time that are founders of SaaS companies. I used to be in Ventureland, and that's how they know me. And so they're like, hey, do you do this for us? I haven't said yes to any of them yet. My point there is this: you will get leads from other people that are not necessarily quite in that niche. I don't think you're taking stuff off the table by doing it. In fact, I think it makes it better because every single piece of content you create is speaking directly to those people. And I think the world is a pretty big place, and there are enough people in your target market that you can build a thriving business by speaking directly to them and their problems. That's problem number two, is just getting them to buy into that idea of put a stake in the ground and say, this is who we are and this is who we're not. In terms of implementing, when they're trying to do the authority stuff themselves, one of the main reasons I exist is most consulting firms are seller doers. They're selling the work and delivering the work, and they know they should do marketing, but it's like the definition of important but not urgent, and so they never get around to it. When you dig underneath the surface, there's a lack of confidence. They think that they're bad writers, or they don't have anything interesting to say. And they learn through our engagements that they actually do, and they get better at it. If they get to a point where they don't need me anymore, that's a great outcome. I get on a call with them for 90 minutes each month and we talk and riff on ideas. They start to discover month one's really easy because it's like low hanging fruit. Month two is the hardest. But around month three, they're like, oh yeah, that call I had yesterday with that client, here's an interesting story that would be applicable. What's the meta lesson out of that conversation? Once their antenna is up, they start to see that there's ideas everywhere, and then they become really into it and what they're excited about. Once they get over the hump of the fear of hitting publish and seeing that you don't get bombarded with a bunch of negative comments, people are either really kind or they don't say anything. That helps a lot too. Those are probably some of the main ones. And not trying to microwave it, I think, would be the last one.
G2, I have these platforms like that. So go to the professional service.
B2 in particular has made a big push. If you go to the website now, one of them is services, and so now it's got vendors. Yeah.
Like I,
Yeah.
The sites
Yep.
Anyway.
Yep. My thinking was, I'm going to capture these reviews, use them in my marketing collateral and all of those other things. If it's a calculated bet, if G2 gets the kind of traction with services that they got with products, so I'm thinking in like a 3 to 5 year time horizon here. If that happens, that is a channel that will get basically for free. The beauty of reviews is that they're artifacts that have a shelf life and measured in years, right? So like a review somebody wrote 5 years ago is still helpful for me if someone goes onto that platform. And so the way I thought about it was, I'm going to ask you for a review rather than just asking you to reply to me. I might as well have you go on this platform. I can still grab it off the platform and put it on my social. They have tiered plans. I'm not using any of the tiered stuff right now. It's free. And so I can repurpose it for all that other stuff. And then I have found it's really helpful if I'm in a sales call with somebody, I get off a call and I send them my PDF with examples of content that we've created for these other firms. So they see the breadth that we can do and how technical we can get. And then I send them just a link to the review page on G2. And because I think it's on a third-party site, I think there's a credibility piece to it too, that they know, anybody that knows G2 knows that like they're vetted profiles and they actually go and make sure this is a real person and blah, 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 blah. So it's not like the stock photo on your website and it's Lindsay S. and Waukegan says blank. I think there's maybe a little bit of skepticism on leveraging the platform subconsciously that way too. So I realized I had to choose one, and I don't think it's appropriate for me to ask them to leave one on all of these different platforms. Clutch is another one that's specific to service providers. I made a calculated decision just on how successful I saw G2 execute on the product side. I trust that they're probably going to be really pretty good at this. So yeah, thanks for coming. If you ever have any other questions, I'm in 109. Happy to bounce ideas off each other and compare notes. If you send me an email, I'll send you the stuff I mentioned. I have the frameworks webinar. I'll send you this recording. What else did I say I would send? Examples of manifestos. Anything else that you think would be relevant if you want more examples of stuff, happy to share. Sean at Hire Madison. It's SEAN.